Welcome to Backyard Safari. Today we're going to be visiting two different habitats. One of them is a place like this. It's in an urban setting where nature is slowly but surely taking over. The other habitat we're going to visit is in a suburban area, not so close to the city. And there too, nature is taking over, but in a little more organized manner. Wildlife can be found in any backyard. It doesn't have to be a wilderness area out west. You can find wildlife in an urban lot like this where some refuse and trash has been piled up. You can find it in a suburban backyard. One of the first things that an animal needs, though, for its survival is water. The other things it needs are shelter and food. So when I go to look at a backyard, the first thing I look for is water. That's the most important thing. In this yard, there are a number of trays and buckets and other things that have trapped water, including this upside-down table. This little table may be a water bowl at night for raccoons and possums, maybe even somebody's dog or cat walking through the area. When I found this, first thing I looked in it for was mosquitoes, and sure enough, there's about 150, maybe 200 mosquito larvae in here. The adult female mosquitoes that fly around this area use this to lay their eggs in. The eggs hatch out into wrigglers, and then these wrigglers here are going to develop into adults to fly away, and some of them will feed on plants and others will feed on possibly us. Underneath this tray right here, it's nice and cool and damp, so there's a good chance there'll be something else living around this area. Maybe a slug or an earthworm, no telling what. First thing you have to do when you're investigating a backyard is remember safety. Safety first. So when I turn things over, I usually wear gloves just to be on the safe side. But I'm going to pick this up. Again, remember, this is somebody's home, so pick it up carefully. And also, when you pick something up, return it back the way you found it when you're done looking. This is unexpected and totally harmless. A beautiful, beautiful little ringneck snake. Ringneck snakes are not real common, at least not in this area. I've not found very many. As you move further south and out west, they become more common. Ringneck snakes get their name because they have a bright yellow or orange ring right around their neck. They usually have bright yellow underbellies, which they can use as a warning for predators that might want to eat them. They're not poisonous. They eat slugs, earthworms, small lizards, especially small lizards. It's a burrowing animal. That is, it likes to spend its life burrowing down underground, looking for those little lizards, especially skinks. As you can see, this is a very small snake, but it's really quite beautiful. A real treasure. This is a real nice find. It's an animal that is adapted to living in suburban and urban settings because there's usually a lot of lizards, slugs, and other small animal forms for them to eat. When you turn something upside down, you always want to remember to put it back the way you found it. I'll give this guy some leaves to hide under. The next place we're going to go is to look around some structure, places that would provide shelter and protection for animal life. I've poked around a little bit already, and I know where there are a few spiders, so that's where we're going to go next. This area here with all these bricks is a real attraction to me. I've always enjoyed turning things over, but I need to caution anybody that's working in a pile of bricks like this that there are a lot of things living under here that you don't want to get on you. You may not even want to get them near you. There might be fire ants in here, which don't occur everywhere. Fire ants are found throughout the southeast, but I can see a spider web right in front of me, and I know by the looks of that web that that's a black widow spider. Black widows get their name because they're a jet black spider. The female has a bright red spot underneath her abdomen. As the name implies, well, they're called widows because in some cases the female spider will actually eat her mate, her male. That doesn't always happen, but occasionally it does. Black widows are extremely venomous. They have very small fangs, but they're large enough to penetrate human skin. The venom is very potent and can make somebody very, very sick. So you need to exercise a lot of caution when messing around in brick piles like this, or turning over any rubbish. Always wear gloves, wear protective footwear. Gloves like this can be a problem for you because the cuff is wide open and you can scrape things off of the underside of a brick. I've turned them over already and found a few things. I've seen centipedes in here, some millipedes, pill bugs, there's some crickets in here, lots of spiders. And the spiders are in here because there are lots of things to eat. Under this brick, for example, is a brown spider called a phelistid spider. Phelistid spiders are found inside houses very often. They spin a web up in corners and around windows, and they trap flying insects like flies and moths. So phelistid spiders can be somewhat of a help inside a house. Their cobwebs don't look very attractive. This one has a lot of young with her, so she's probably been living under here for a couple of weeks, guarding her egg sac. And then the eggs hatched out into little spiderlings, which will, in another week or so, move away from here and spread out into the rest of the brick pile and maybe into the house. Also, under some of these bricks, as I mentioned, are centipedes. Centipedes, like the black widow, can bite. They have a pair of fangs, and they can inject a small amount of venom. There went a little silverfish running across this brick. No, that's another pill bug. Looks like a silverfish. Here's a cricket. A hole down here may be a home for a mouse, so there's probably some little field mice living in here, or actually not field mice, the European house mouse probably living in here. The centipedes are very similar to millipedes. They don't have 100 legs. They have a lot of legs, a pair of legs per body segment. The centipedes also eat other animals, millipedes and insects, maybe even other centipedes and some spiders. And so you need to be careful with them because of their venomous bite. Always be careful in brick piles because, as I mentioned, there are some things that can bite and sting that live in here. But it's a good habitat, lots of protection for a lot of different animals. Right here is a nice little spider. It's a type of garden spider or an orb weaver. They call them orb weavers because they spin a round web that traps flying insects like, not spiders, but butterflies and flies and other, even mosquitoes. So here's a beneficial spider. It's a really beautiful little animal. Normally you find these in forests, especially forested areas that are right up against a field. But here we have one right in an urban setting, living right next to a house. Where I'm standing is typical habitat for what happens when you quit mowing a yard. A lot of vines have moved in here. This area used to be probably a very nice grassed yard. Actually, it looks very nice to me right now. The greater number of plants you have in a given area, then you'll probably have a greater number of different kinds of animals. If I were to dig around in the leaves here, I'd probably find some pill bugs, roly-polies, or isopods is their more correct name. I might find some spiders again, earthworms. There's probably some lizards down in here, maybe even a few small snakes, another ringneck snake or possibly a red-bellied snake, which is also a very small animal. The first thing I noticed when I looked in here was poison ivy. There's lots of poison ivy. And the reason for that is that poison ivy plants produce a little white berry, which is delicious to birds. The birds eat the berry, fly off, land in a tree, and deposit those berries underneath trees and in places just like this. So we've got poison ivy growing right here in front of me, and right next to the poison ivy is a similar looking plant called Virginia creeper. Virginia creeper has 5 leaflets instead of 3. Also growing in here is another vine, greenbrier. Greenbrier is a vine that's usually found growing in forested areas, but like the poison ivy, it spreads by birds carrying the seeds for them. This one is a brand new shoot. It's probably just a couple of weeks old, and the spines on it, although they're real large, are still quite soft. This is some privet that was planted at one time. It's going rank now. There's some type of a composite flower right here. Lots of different plants moving in. This looks like a red bud. So again, plants that are planted in other parts of this urban setting that have invaded once the grounds in this area were no longer mowed and kept cut back. We're going to check one more spot closer to the house to see what happens to an area, a landscaped area, when you let that go. Where we are now is in a garden that has been essentially left to nature. There were some plants in here, and this was probably maintained for quite a few years, but it's now essentially abandoned. I was picking around underneath this drop cloth here, and with just some very simple scraping and looking around, I found over a dozen huge earthworms. This is the presence of earthworms this size is an indication of very rich soil. So this was probably mulched and well maintained, but these are nice sized earthworms right here. The earthworms are decomposers. They actually eat the soil and digest off of the soil grains the bacteria and microscopic animals and plants that are in the soil itself. Also under this little sheet were a number of slugs. The slug is a relative of snails. It's actually a snail without a shell. And slugs are a nuisance in gardens because they eat plants, especially tomatoes, but they too are a decomposer. They break down dead leaves and other matter that's in here. So slugs have a role to play. There were a lot of isopods, which are also called roly-polies. Isopods are primitive animals. They live underneath things, again, decomposers. So it's a real indication that this was a spot that at one time had lots of rich plant matter, a lot of humus. Snails are in here. This is a terrestrial snail. That is, it lives on land. It gets its oxygen from air, just as we do. They have relatives that live in the ocean that grow to be quite large, but this animal here is about full grown, maybe a half-inch across. Not real big. I expected to see some millipedes. There weren't any in here. There could be some centipedes in here. I didn't find any underneath this object here, but if I looked around, I probably would find something. There's some brush piled up where there's other animals living. The earthworms being in here are going to be good food for animals like moles and shrews. So I suspect that there are moles occasionally in here eating the earthworms. Poison ivy, so that means birds that eat poison ivy seeds have been around this area. As you can see, this area is being taken over by nature. Nature doesn't like empty spots. Now we're out in a suburban lot. And in the suburban lot, we find nature being given more opportunities to introduce wild animals a lot more quickly than is capable in an urban setting. I want to show you under this log right here is a nest, oh, there's a neat grass spider, is a nest of red ants. These are getting ready to leave, actually. You can see here are some winged ants right there, males and females. They're going to leave this nest and fly off. They'll fly up into the air and find each other up there. They'll mate, come back to Earth, and set up a nest somewhere else. So this nest right here is getting ready to finish out. It's run its cycle. The queen is somewhere down in this hole here, and she's produced all these workers. There's a big worker ant right there. These ants are not usually found in a downtown setting. This is a type of ant that you would find really more out in the wild rather than downtown. Beautiful ants. And they pretty much live in the ground. They gather up leaves and other vegetation for their food. They're not like fire ants or anything like that. They're not a hazard to us. They live very happily right here by themselves. Really quite large, too. You can see some of these guys. Quite big. These are related to the wasps and the bees. So they look kind of wasp-like. Big chewing jaws, so that this one will be able to dig a nest. And they'll dig down into the ground. Usually what this type of ant likes to find are boards, like you can see here, or rocks, and even rotten logs. They like to dig down underneath those things for protection. And this nest goes all the way back up under these bricks here. It's a pretty good-sized nest. Three key ingredients to any backyard or any habitat: water, food, and shelter. And as the ants living under this board have their shelter there, some other animals have their shelter under this board. I turned this over a little while ago, and there was a nice toad living under here. And he's happily making his living eating crickets and grasshoppers that live out in the grass here. By day, the toad finds its shelter, its safety, right under here. Sometimes you may find a slimy salamander under here. It's nice and cool and damp. It'll stay that way throughout the summer. So that's a good hiding spot for the southern toad, this guy right here. Now at night, this toad will come out of there when it's cooled off, especially if there's a mist or if it's real humid. The toad will crawl out from under this board and go hunting out in the grass here. If there's a street light somewhere, or a house light even, that's attracting flying insects, then this guy may even go right up to that light. It's a favorite spot for toads, nice, cool, dark places, or any amphibian for that matter. They make themselves right at home under here. So shelter is very important. Another form of shelter is old buildings. And in a suburban setting, or a farm setting even, an old building like this shed right here, it's got just hollow walls and there's nothing in there. Just maybe in some sheds you might have old furniture or things like that. But up in the rafters, up in the top of an old shed, you may find some snakes. One of the most common snakes to find up there is a rat snake. Rat snakes come in a wide variety of colorations. There's corn snakes that are bright orange and red with flashes of yellow in them sometimes. There's the black rat snake, which is common up in the northern states of the U.S., up from Maine down to the northern part of North Carolina. It's jet black, called a pilot snake sometimes. And then in southeastern U.S., you've got a green rat snake, which is a pale greenish color with black stripes. And they're all often called chicken snakes because they're sometimes found in chicken huts eating, unfortunately, chicken eggs and sometimes chicken chicks. But the value of these snakes is outweighed by their ability to eat, or the value of the snakes is so great because they eat rats and mice. They may eat a couple of chicken eggs, but we can begrudge them their chicken eggs because of the rats and mice that they eat. So in a suburban setting, you're going to find not only a greater diversity of animal types, but you're going to start seeing bigger animal types. In the urban lot, you might find those little ringneck snakes, but out here in the suburbs, you'll find the ringneck snakes along with even bigger snakes because you have bigger things for them to hide in. I think I've always enjoyed reptiles, and next to turtles, my favorite reptile are the lizards. In this area, southeastern U.S., see if I can grab one out of here, there are a pretty good number of different types of lizards. One of them, this guy here, this is a green anole. You can see he gets his name green because he is bright green. This is a male, and when he's irritated or feels threatened by something, he'll spread out this fan right here, which is called a dewlap. The green anole is often called a chameleon. This isn't a chameleon. Chameleons live in the old world, Africa and the Mediterranean. They don't live in the U.S. These are pretty common. They're often found in pet shops, but they need good sunlight in order to keep their body good and strong. So I don't really recommend them as a long-term pet. If you're going to keep one of these, they do best for short-term rather than long-term captivity. They like it out in the wild best. Neat lizards. They have claws, scales, and eyelids. Unlike snakes that have no legs and no eyelids. That's one way to tell a lizard from a snake. Legs and eyelids. One success story for backyards, especially in the suburban habitat, or suburban backyard, has been a great number of bluebirds returning to our area, returning to the U.S., especially the eastern bluebird. Its numbers were knocked down because of a lack of places to nest. Bluebirds are cavity nesters. They build their nest inside hollow fence posts or dead tree snags, or in this case here, a manufactured bluebird box. This one was used this year by a pair of chickadees instead of bluebirds, and the nest is still in here. They've left. The young chickadees have all fledged and taken off. There were 3 this year, so they're off somewhere now. And what I'm going to do is clean this box out, take the nest out of here, sweep it out real good, so that if a pair of bluebirds happen by, they might want to move in. You can get 2 or 3 clutches a year, but this box is easy to make. It's got a hinged front, so I can open it up and clean it out from the front. But what's really neat is seeing how they built this nest. Again, this is chickadees. There's moss in here that they gathered up off of the ground, maybe growing on some tree trunks. There's some hair from something, maybe a dog or a horse. This looks like cedar. They stripped off some cedar bark. They made a really very nice nest. Some ants are in here now. There are probably some bird lice, maybe some other parasites. And that's why I'm going to clean the nest out. Birds that use cavities like this, especially bluebirds, they won't as quickly reoccupy a nest box if there's an old nest in there. And that may be for survival purposes. There may be some fly eggs in here. There might be an ant nest, any number of things, especially bird lice, which are a parasite. So I'm going to clean all of that out, and maybe in a week or 2, there's going to be a pair of bluebirds building a nest in here. Very simple thing to make, and does very well in a suburban backyard like this. You can see it's on a clothesline post, so they're not bothered by people, as long as you don't open them up until after the young have left. By the way, it's a myth about touching a baby bird and then the parents not coming back to it. If you touch a baby bird, the parents will continue to take care of it, but the problem that you run into by handling boxes like this after birds have moved in are raccoons. A raccoon will smell the presence of a human. They follow that human smell because raccoons think at the end of the human rainbow is going to be garbage to eat. So they're going to follow the smell of a human up here and get the eggs and the young out of here. So once birds have moved into a box, leave it alone. One other difference between a suburban backyard and an urban backyard is going to be the ability for a habitat to create a home for something like these guys here. These are eastern box turtles. Box turtles are found in a wide variety of habitats. This field right here is perfect for them because it's a mixture of grasses and broadleaf plants, and there's one of their favorite foods growing in here, blackberries. They'll be eating these blackberries for another few weeks, and then they'll go off and look for other forms of food. When the grasshoppers are really plentiful, they'll eat those. They also like earthworms. Box turtles are, as with many other types of animal life in our country, are in trouble. One of the reasons is because of roads. When a box turtle falls down off of a curb into a highway, they can't get across that highway, and because they can't get back up onto the curb and out again. So we need to put literally handicap access ramps on our curbing for the box turtle's sake. They're going to be chowing down in here. By the way, this is a male and a female. This male right here has a caved-in plastron, the underside. On the female, it's not caved in. The male has bright orange eyes. The female usually a duller brown color. You can see the male's got a bright orange head. The female is kind of brown. But that doesn't mean anything. Coloration, the box turtles are, every box turtle is different from another. They're just like people. No 2 box turtles are exactly alike. But I'm going to let these guys have some lunch, which I'm sure they will enjoy to no small degree. Right now. Thanks, guys. Backyards are important, no matter where you are, whether it's a backyard in a downtown setting or a backyard in a suburban setting. Backyard habitats are one of the most important places for wildlife as their native natural areas are disappearing. If you want to build and maintain a backyard, it's easy to do, and it's very important for animals like this that are running out of places to live. Thanks for being with me today.